Hey Whitney, have you noticed that the old ways of working aren't working anymore?
Yes, Iris. Let's talk about it. I'm Whitney.
And I'm Iris. We are two elite executive coaches slash moms slash recovering Olympians. We found that we had to unlearn so much of what we were taught as elite athletes and women to gain more freedom and health.
And we've seen our clients facing the same dilemmas. As coaches, we get this front row view of high-performing humans. And we realize we're all trying to make the best out of our potential, both at work and at home.
We will take you behind the curtain and share with you how we untrain our clients and ourselves from toxic mindsets and habits. We will offer you the frameworks and tools to live and work with more ease and joy.
Welcome to Untrained.
Hi, Whitney.
Good morning, Iris.
I think that's how the morning's going.
I think
Put that back
sums
on.
up the morning. There we go. Why are we wearing these things? Why did I send you a pair? Why did you send me a pair via Amazon?
Well, you sent me these. I'm thinking, why do we feel sometimes that we're in disguise? Do we feel like we're faking it sometimes? We're like, well, let's put these on and hopefully they'll think that I fit in over here.
Yeah, I can put on my mask and, take it from there. And we're going to start with that idea of masks and how we're actually doing. And I'm going to start not at the beginning, because we're going to reference an article by Leslie Jamison from the New Yorker called Why Everyone Feels Like They're Faking It. And it's a beautiful article, so many great nuggets. I'm going to start by reading something from the very end of the article, how it relates to a personal story for me, and then we'll jump into this topic more generally. Sound like a good plan?
Imposter syndrome. Yes, we are talking about
imposter syndrome.
Yes.
All right, because all of our clients are talking about it, and we find ourselves talking about it. So let's talk about it honestly and deeply as we can. Land's observation helped me realize that imposter phenomenon, because that's how it was originally, the term that was originally coined, as a concept, effectively functions as an emotional filing cabinet, organizing a variety of fraught feelings that we can experience as we try and reconcile three aspects of our personhood. I love the way she teased that up. How we experience ourselves, how we present ourselves to the world, and how the world reflects that self back to us. The phenomenon names an unspoken, ongoing crisis arising from the gaps between these various versions of the self and designates not a syndrome or something pathological, but an inescapable part of being alive. I love that. Just takes the pathology out and says, we're talking about an inescapable part of being alive at this moment in time. I need to change myself. There's something wrong with me. There's something in me that could be more blah, 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 to the reality of this is not a game I'm going to win through improving myself. And I think that is a nice gateway into this article and what it names. And I also want to name that I am saying all this as a privileged white female, and knowing full well that I experience a fraction of the challenge that women of color experience. So I want to name that, and the article names that, and some other dynamics that are different depending on race. But let's talk about the history of imposter syndrome, which was originally imposter phenomena, and dive into what we're seeing relative to the topic in our clients.
So in 1985, Pauline Clance was wondering even about her own thoughts of, I'm not enough, or this isn't good enough. And she surveyed a bunch of high performing women and wondering also they were feeling that way too, of like, I'm not good enough, or I can't do this. And part of it was a lot of them were in environments where they weren't the norm of success, right? So the paradigm of success was typically in those academic settings, a white male. And so oftentimes there's this sort of disconnect between this is what it takes to be at the top, and I'm not really sure I have what it takes because I don't look like them, I don't talk like them, I don't think like them. So
I don't see myself reflected back to me.
I don't see myself. So there's like a real disconnect. So that research that she did then came up with imposter phenomenon and talking through it. And the article is there. And I think what you and I really want to do is really talk about where it is today, right? So there was this group of women just in 1985, and they're feeling this imposter syndrome. Now we fast forward to 2023. How are people feeling this? And then how do we then also have these conversations around inclusion as well, right? So not just women in the workplace, but people with different cultural backgrounds, cultural humility, and as paradigms of success continue to shift in the workplace. And how are these, how is this phenomenon showing up for our clients?
Mm-hmm. And one of the places we see it is around these threshold experiences. And that's one of the research named threshold experiences as being a key trigger for these feelings of not enoughness. So a threshold experience could be a new job. It could be entering academics. It could be switching social classes. It could be anything where you went from one
place and
culture
identity,
place and thank you to another. And people tend to internalize the gap versus say, oh, I'm going through a threshold experience. I went from one identity to another, and it's taking me a little while to catch up, and I'm blaming myself because I feel like if I can improve myself, that gives me a sense of control, and then maybe one day I will feel comfortable. But the challenge is all the endless things we do to feel enough often just fuel the not enough. So then we're in a trap.
Yeah. So I'm going back to the article because it had so many good and juicy tidbits. So I want to utilize the article's words. It was so well written. Imposter feelings often arise most acutely from the threshold crossing, from one social class to another, one culture to another, one vocation to another, something akin to what Pierre Bourdieu called the split habitus, the self-dwelling in two worlds at once. So I like that, the self-dwelling in two worlds at once. And I told you also about my experience at Stanford University. So I graduated from Stanford, and everyone's like, "Oh, that's so cool," or whatever. You made it to the upper echelon, and I still struggle with identifying as a Stanford alumni. And when I went there,
why is that?
Why is that? Well, when I went there, I never felt like I was really part of it. Right? I felt like I was playing. Hold on one second. Playing in disguise. Right? So I felt I was like really in disguise. I was this kid who grew up in Rochester, New York, who had lower middle class parents who couldn't afford all the college prep courses and all these things. And I went to a city school. So it wasn't like, city school was great, but it wasn't the same as some of the opportunities that were afforded to the sort of upper echelon of elite that went to Stanford, that got into Stanford. And there were some kids who lived their whole lives to want to get into Stanford. And I got in an athletic scholarship, which I'm very thankful for. But going there, I always felt like I wasn't part of it, that I wasn't there. I was going to class, but auditing class. I was like, I'm there, but I'm not really there. Right. So I was definitely in disguise. So that was my first feeling of it. And even now, I don't feel connected to it. Right. So I feel like I get these alumni letters. I even got a Stanford magazine today, and I still feel like, oh, they're sending me these Stanford magazines because I once visited Stanford for a couple of years. I just feel like I just visited. So I think part of it is I crossed a cultural threshold, that I have immigrant parents, and this is this prestigious university in the United States. So now I got here. Now what? Okay. And I have parents who couldn't even afford a laptop. I had to buy my own laptop to go to class. That's not what happens at Stanford typically. So I'm, headed to school with a laptop that I had to put on credit, right? So it feels like there's this, I don't really belong here. And I've had that feeling multiple times. And so for me, that when the article talked about threshold crossing, it really sparked, oh my God, that's how I felt when I went to Stanford.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how do you work with yourself now when that feeling arises?
Well, I have that feeling a lot. I don't think I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Dr. Lisa Orbe Austin. I reached out to her. She's actually my coach. So a coach has a coach. And she literally wrote workbooks and just came out with her second workbook on imposter syndrome. And I'm still working through it. I think as an immigrant kid, a kid with immigrant parents who didn't come up from a lot of affluence, who is now in this, who I would say, I'm Stanford educated, I have an MBA, people look to me for advice, or I'm coaching people who are the elite in business. There's a lot of that. Even as coaching, I'll show up and be like, oh my God, why am I coaching this person? Right. And you would look at me and say, wow. Of
course she's coaching that person.
Of course she's coaching that person, but I feel a real disconnect to it. So I'm still working on it. And you and I talk about like, how do we embody that? Right. And so how do we feel like we're that person? And I'm constantly working on it. I'm constantly trying to show myself every time I have a success. Okay, we can do this. There's no disguise. We just coached this person. You did a great job. And so there is work around it. I literally, when I'm done with a client and I've had that imposter syndrome, when we're finished, I'll tell myself, okay, let's just acknowledge and accept the reality of what just happened here. It went really well.
So you're literally trying to take it in, because it sounds like the Stanford experience, you couldn't actually take it in. It almost kind of like bounced off you. And so now you're actively trying to take it in. And I find a lot of my clients can't take it in. They say, well, I did these 8 million things and I know they were amazing, but I still feel like I'm not enough. And I might say, well, let's imagine that the 8 million things was like a bucket. How much of that bucket could you take in? Teaspoon, drop, a cup? And because I think sometimes it's too much to take it in, especially if you're just learning how to take it in. So when you take it in, how much can you take in of that great session?
Oh man, it is really hard. I'm going to say the work is hard. It's not easy. I use a lot of gestures, as you know. I'm probably Italian somewhere too. I'm German and Chinese, and I'm going to say I'm Italian too because I use my hands. But my Stanford experience feels like this. That's that, and here's me. Now, as a 42-year-old woman, when I feel that, it's like I'm trying to fold it in. Like I'm trying to take this out here and then bring it inside.
Like weave it? Yeah.
Weave it here. I think it's this lifelong learning of, I also deal with my my feelings of imposter phenomenon by self-validating that that's my success. I might not see someone that looks like me or has the same sport as me, but I'm still an Olympian and I'm still successful. And that's hard. I mean, that's really hard.
And surrounding yourself with people who see you and validate you. I think that's another key. Because a lot of the origins of this are, am I accurately seen? Like the mirror that's being held up to me, is it an accurate mirror? And I think the literature supports that people who didn't have that early accurate mirroring, people who weren't seen, people who had narcissistic parents, are also might be triggered more easily into feeling like, I don't belong, I'm not enough, and I don't really fit in here.
Can we talked about this before of redefining imposter phenomenon. I would love for us to think about the when we see these aspects, what are we seeing, right? So instead of using those words, what are things that we're seeing, right? So you just said not an accurate mirror, right? There are people that you're around in your environment that aren't seeing you as you see yourself, or aren't accurately reflecting you.
Yep. And I see it a lot in my coaching practice as the article states, around threshold experiences. I was a senior manager and now I'm a partner or a managing director. And what does that mean? And am I really enough? And, people tend to go into their stress patterns. And so a lot of times, people are doing the overworking things or going too quickly or second guessing themselves or ruminating or any of these patterns that are really tiring on the nervous system. So one of the places I come in is just being real, as you said, like really curious about how it's affecting that person and what patterns they're going into and what's the impact of those patterns, helping them see the impact of those patterns and giving them some choices or exploring with them some choices as how to shift those patterns and operate in a way that's kinder to their nervous system and to themselves.
It sounds
what do you see and how do you work with it?
Yeah. So I'll just reflect on you on what you just said, because I'm translating it in my head to there's patterns and behaviors that show us how we're managing the stress of feeling we're not enough. Right. So you can also,
and usually it's a sort of like fight or flight response.
Right. Like, so yes, exactly. So you and I often help them get to a more neutral place with their nervous system. And then we start to begin to do the work of either self-validation or seeing themselves or working on the next step. When I see, I would have to be honest, when I work with women, I'm not going to just blanket, just in generalization. I'm just saying, oftentimes I feel the work is in a timeout on fixing yourself. I'm like, timeout. I'm like, timeout.
Timeout on self-improvement or over-efforting.
Over-efforting, exactly. Like, if you find yourself in a pattern of fight or flight, is there something in your environment that's invoking that? Is there a person? Is there a situation? Is there a threshold change? What is happening and going on around you that's triggering this response? So I think a lot of times when I see it, at least for, and I know I'm making a generalization, but I time out on the let's fix this. Because oftentimes I feel like my clients aren't really looking at the external environment. Because a lot of times when we feel afraid, we turn inside and we then, it's like those little bugs, like we kind of roll up into ourselves and go, okay, what can we change and what can we control within ourselves? And I always ask, like, what is about the environment that you need in order to feel safe so that you can show up as yourself?
Yeah.
I'll say it again. What about your environment and the people around you is not allowing you to feel safe enough to show up as yourself? Are you feeling a microaggression? Are you feeling triggered? What is not allowing safety? So for me, I coach from a place of what isn't safe. And I've had clients, like, when they hear that, they're like, holy shit. Because they're like, I'm thinking I need to make my environment safe, not thinking the environment around me needs to provide the support to help me feel safe.
And that's why the article was critical of the term imposter syndrome, because it puts the onus on the individual versus let's look at these systems that are creating a sense of not enoughness and triggering people to be in fight or flight.
I'm going to just keep it real and say, in the environments, when we dissect, sometimes my clients figure out there is no amount, and we've talked about this too today, there is no amount of fixing myself that will fix this environment. There is no time in the present that they're ever going to see me.
Right. It's not set up that way. It's not set up for that particular success, for you to feel seen. And having acceptance of that really shifts how you see it, which shifts the questions you're asking, right? So the question goes from, my question has shifted from, how do I make myself more resilient, more efficient, more whatever, less triggered, to this environment, I can't be successful here. So what needs to change outside of me? And that's a very different question that I don't know the answer to.
See, I think a lot of times in the coaching realm, what's really important are these shifts, right? So we might not have the answer at the end of a podcast or at the end of these shifts in ourselves, but what shifts are the questions we ask ourselves, right? Of where we begin, instead of asking ourselves. And I don't think you shouldn't take responsibility for your behavior, but I think it's using your behavior to also see there are other factors that are out of your control, right? So
Mhm.
what questions you ask yourself really make a difference and can help shift your behaviors and staying with the questions. We don't have to get to a resolution right away. We're not going to solve the discomfort today. What we're going to do
Yes.
is shift the attention away from where it shouldn't be to where it can actually be useful.
So I run Groups for Chief, which is for C-suite women, and they come together and they share. They share work challenges. They share the challenges they're facing. Every group that I've worked with has wanted to talk about the topic of imposter syndrome at some point. And I think one of the things that's valuable is being seen and heard for how you really feel, taking the mask off and going, I've got the filing cabinet of feelings of not enoughness somewhere, and having people say, me too. And this is what mine looks like. And this is what mine looks like. And when my boss asked me to tell the client that I had all this experience when I didn't, that made me feel like an imposter. And the group can help them think about, well, how do you want to show up and what would feel better? Or like this morning with you, and you're like, how can I help? And I'm like, I just wanted to be honest. And, it just helped to be able to say, like I'm not okay and I'm having a hard time and I don't know the solution, but thank you for being willing to see me honestly and be a safe space where I can be all that I'm feeling. I think that is valuable.
I want to underscore your point and just say hell yes, because I think what's helped both clients that are men and women. So it's not just not just women. My male clients also.
Yes.
And I think what has helped them the most, yes, the coaching does help, but having a shared experience of, oh, you took off your disguise and you're feeling the same way. I'm feeling that too. So having someone validate that you're not crazy, that you do feel disconnected, that this does happen and the environment might have something to do with it, or you have similar experiences, having that shared thought or opening up to someone, having someone validate that is really important. So we talk about allyship in belonging, and I think that's really important to this process too, of like reach out to other people. And even in the 1985 research, she reached out. She's like,
yes.
I feel like I'm crazy. Do other people feel this
And that's
way?
how this all began. That's the origin story of this label, like this research, is someone saying, am I the only one? And partnering with someone who is like, no, let's find out who else might have. In that case, and then there's also a recent article with the Harvard Business Review. The articles were far more popular than anyone ever anticipated because the topic is just so relevant right now because the gaps are everywhere.
I would say, what do you think is the final word for us? This is a huge topic, so we'll probably go back to it at some point, but
Yes.
What do you feel are the relevant points you want people to take away from today's discussion?
If you feel something that you've labeled imposter syndrome, welcome. You're human.
Now what? Right? So now what do I do? Can I shift anything in my environment? Can I ask for more support in the environment? And if you are up against, like some of my clients, especially in healthcare, I hate to say that, but they might be up against something where they can't fight it, or the system right now doesn't totally match what they need to help them feel.
And I think you mentioned healthcare because so much is out of a person's control when you're in healthcare. Your schedule, there's so much rigidity to the system that people lack control. And one of the research says like one of the reasons burnout happens is when we don't have control of our schedule. So I think there's that. I'm going to go, I've never articulated this or thought this before, but I'm kind of excited about it. So let me know what you think. I think an antidote to imposter syndrome is alignment. I think finding places, things, experiences, people where we feel aligned, where we feel connected, that invite us to feel more like ourselves and more connected to ourselves. So if we need to do that outside of work to sort of do some repair, great. For me today, truth felt like alignment, just like saying the truth versus pretending. So what do you think of that theory that alignment is a bit of can help us shift out of imposter syndrome?
I love it because I think it speaks to what we've been talking about as being seen and heard as yourself. Because when we put on a disguise, it just means that we're not safe to be our whole selves. That I need to somehow be something different to fit in. And so you need to find places where you feel like people know me, they're not judging, they're on the same page, they accept me for who I am, all of it. So I don't need to put on a disguise. One of the things that some people have said to me, clients and friends, they go, you know what? Around you, Iris, I just can wear my sweats, or I feel like I could just be myself. And I feel like that's the highest level of compliment. And I feel like that's a lot of what I do in my coaching too, is help people feel in alignment, to be seen, to be heard. And I think that's the power of coaching too. You're absolutely right. I think that's what we're feeling as coaches, is we can also help people. And you're right. My clients too, even yesterday, I talked to someone who feels out of alignment with their working group. And we talked about finding groups outside of work that help her feel more in alignment, that see her, that light her up, that make her feel like she can be herself. She doesn't have to hide. She can be as smart as she wants to be. She can be as sarcastic and funny as she wants to be. So I think it is important to find places, if you're not feeling that at work, or to align in finding groups that can do that for you, or friends or coaches or people that can help make you feel seen and heard.
And thank you to all the people out there working on changing systems, moving things in systems to help them be more aligned with the people that are working there. So thank you to the people doing that work, and we'll continue to do the work with individuals, and keep untraining.
Keep untraining. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast.
Oh, yes. Don't forget to subscribe
to our podcast and YouTube channel if you like what you're hearing. And I know today was a long discussion. This is a very, very intricate topic, and I'm sure we'll be back to it again. So please do subscribe. More of this stuff coming your way.